Alright, so Game of Thrones series finale. You would think that it would be something to celebrate, but it's not. You would think that it would be epic, but it's not. You would think that it'd be well written, but it's not. And I watched this. I was planning a massive video dump before because I had taken some time off from my channel, and then I was gonna do this review, but then I watched it and I had to take some time to really let this wrap around my head because it doesn't feel like Game of Thrones. This is so poorly written. I get some people will defend it. If you're a diehard fan, some people are gonna defend it. No matter what, they're gonna defend it. But let's be honest, you are overlooking some really, really huge problems with the show. It's not about, it didn't turn out the way I wanted it. Whether you're somebody who believes this is in Daenerys' character or not, to massacre a bunch of people at a moment's notice, just a bunch of innocents, kill them all. Whether you're somebody who's just really disappointed by the fact that Jon Snow gets sent back to the Night's Watch, where he started, and it makes all that stuff they built up, it makes no sense. Whether you're somebody, bothered by the Daenerys thing or the Jon Snow thing, still, even if you're not one of them, you have to acknowledge the flaws in this episode, this series finale, because they're pretty right in your face the whole time you're watching it. Characters are very inconsistent, and it's just crazy. It is crazy that these people, claim they did the best they could, or what. They didn't even try. This whole thing was rushed, and it's very obvious when you look at the details. Everything was just rushed. No, they don't care about these characters or anything. They got their hands on Star Wars. That's all they care about now. So the series, this episode, it would be more believable if it was a backdoor pilot to a Sliders reboot. You zoom out from the TV and you show Quinn Mallory watching this thing, and he's like, oh, this isn't my Game of Thrones. This isn't my Earth. So he slides to another dimension, and then there he finds out that Season 8 is going to be made into a movie instead of a final season on HBO. That would have been more believable and more likable than this, because this is bad. This is really bad. So here's some of the things I tend to notice, such as when they make Bran king, none of it makes any sense at all. It's not consistent within the show's own narrative. It's not. You have Bran previously stating that he can't be king of nothing because he's the three-eyed raven. Well, he said, I'm the three-eyed raven, I can't be king of the north. And in another episode this season, he said, when Tyrion jokingly suggested that he should be king, he said that he's the lord of nothing. So you've already got it, where even in this episode, Tyrion and everybody there recognizes that Bran doesn't want to be king. That's established. And then you have Bran say something like, well, why do you think I came all this way, when they ask him if he accepts being king? See, that right there, it doesn't even make sense. It doesn't make sense. Beyond that, there's a scene between Arya and Jon Snow that doesn't really make sense either. She's referring to Daenerys, and she's like, I know a murderer when I see one. Well, guess what? Who's this line for? Because Jon Snow and Arya were on the ground floor of Daenerys' massacre. They know she's a murderer. We, the audience, know she's a murderer. So, well, who's this line for? What's the purpose of this scene at all? And another thing is that when Jon kills Daenerys, we just do a time skip. He's a prisoner. How does Jon Snow become a prisoner of the Unsullied, Grey Worm, the Dothraki, how does he become a prisoner of them? Because these guys are savages. We've seen that they show no mercy. He just killed their queen, the only authority they recognize, their queen. He just killed her. They're going to imprison him. These guys are savages. They execute prisoners. They do it in this very episode. They execute prisoners that surrendered. So they leave it up to Grey Worm. You're going to expect me to believe that Grey Worm is going to let the nobles of the land they just conquered decide the fate of two people that just committed treason. Not only decide the fate of them, but decide who's going to rule the land that they just conquered. Letting relatives and friends of Jon Snow decide what happens to Tyrion Lannister and Jon Snow himself. They let Tyrion decide who's going to be king of the land they just conquered. This guy that committed treason against the queen, and he chooses Bran. They let somebody else take the land they conquered. It makes no sense. These guys are savages. It literally makes no sense within the show's own narrative. If you're going to stay true to the characters, that stuff makes no sense. Now, beyond that, there's all kinds of other grievances I have with this, and it's, Tyrion needing to convince Jon Snow that he's got to kill the queen, that he's got to do something. All he does in this episode is whine that she's his queen. You're telling me that Jon Snow is willing to overlook the fact that she massacred all these people. He just wants to overlook it. It's like, hey, this is over and done with. Let's just look the other way on this one since it's over now. That's not Jon Snow. Jon Snow's already killed one woman that he's fallen in. Well, I mean, he's already stood up against one woman that he's fallen in love with, and he stood up against the Night's Watch, the commander of the Night's Watch. He climbed through the ranks of the Night's Watch by doing so. This is the guy that doesn't look the other way when it comes to these type of things. He was previously in love with a woman that went crazy, or that was crazy. You're telling me that he's willing to look the other way on somebody who just massacred an entire city of innocents, babies, children, and all that. You're having Tyrion, and this scene really is just to convince the audience that this is that it's the way it's written. It's written to convince the audience that Daenerys is bad, because the way they write it, they want to convince the audience that they didn't make a mistake, that they didn't poorly write this, that all the words Tyrion are saying, he's like, well, maybe she, he talks about her like she's a small child, like she doesn't know the difference between right and wrong because she's gone from place to place, massacring people in the name of good previously. Now she may not know the difference between, what's wrong and what's right. Saying that she's basically so egotistical now that she that she can't tell the difference between right and wrong. And there are moments in the series where Daenerys has to be walked back, where she would have made a very bad decision if somebody wasn't there to advise her otherwise. So there are things like that there, but still I'm not buying that she just abruptly went crazy at a moment's notice and killed innocents at the moment of victory. She already had victory. There was absolutely no need to slaughter all these innocent people. Some would argue that, well, she did it because people need to fear her, that nobody in this land really, loves her or accepts her or fears her, that she did this to be feared. But if you look at it, she already claimed victory. Cersei's a tyrant, so people are obviously gonna fall in love with her for liberating her liberating them from that tyrant. Now you could argue that, well, she was worried about Jon Snow taking the mantle, even though, and being the rightful king, she was worried about that being outed. Maybe this will make Cersei keep her mouth shut. Ultimately, the only thing that convinces Jon Snow he needs to do something is that that Sansa may get hurt. That Sansa will not bend the knee, and what do you think Arya's gonna do if she comes at Sansa? This is ultimately the thing that convinces Jon to do the right thing, to stab Daenerys. But I mean, there's just so many things in here. Why they? Okay, he's gonna kill the queen, right? He's gonna kill Daenerys, but they're just gonna let Grey Worm and the Unsullied and the Dothraki sell off to wherever the hell they're going to slaughter more innocents. I mean, you saw what they did there in King's Landing. They slaughtered people. You could argue, yes, that was under the command of their queen. But what's to stop them from doing it? And again, you're going to let this force go off to slaughter more people? Why wouldn't Jon Snow take all them out? I mean, if you're going to do this right, after Jon Snow kills Daenerys, he needs to mount the dragon, and he needs to take down the Unsullied and the Dothraki. He needs to take them down. There is no reason for Grey Worm or the Dothraki to recognize these nobles of Westeros, the land they just conquered, as an authority on what should be done with prisoners that committed treason. This whole episode, how can anybody, I don't see how anybody can actually defend it, because it's pretty bad. It's pretty insulting to absolutely every character. Grey Worm, he's not gonna let some nobles decide the fate of the person that just killed his queen. Jon Snow isn't gonna be all whiny and like, let's just look the other way. Let's just look the other way on this. It's okay until, you know, this is the guy that's selfless, that sacrificed literally everything, his life, and everything. It's just, wow. The only moment I actually like in the episode, but it's still questionable too, because I don't really, well, I'd have to go back and rewatch episodes, but there's no incentive to now. There's no incentive. I can see the DVD and Blu-ray sales plummeting because all these arcs they built up over the years mean absolutely nothing. They literally don't pay off. Nobody's pays off at all. And here's the thing about making Bran king is that Tyrion goes on about who has the best story, and he suggests that it's Bran who has the best story. But come on, this isn't even Bran, okay? This is some elder ancient being that set up shop in Bran's house. Bran is dead. Bran is dead. His story isn't the greatest. Jon Snow's story is absolutely the greatest. If they would have, you know, respected Jon Snow and paid off his story, I could overlook the whole Daenerys going absolutely crazy at a moment's notice. And I could write this better. I could do a video on how I could actually write this whole season better. Literally. Just where it pays off all the arcs. And I haven't even been writing on this show. I haven't been writing on this show. When I watch shows like this, I view it from a writer's perspective. So I acknowledge when I see flaws like this that are inconsistent with characters or the narrative they built up. It really makes me scratch my head. They wanted to force, they didn't properly build up Daenerys. They had it in their mind this whole time that she was going to be the villain, but they rushed it to the end. They didn't properly transition that. They didn't properly flesh that out. Even with the way they did, like, you could have still pulled it off. If you had her just abruptly go crazy in episode 5 the way she did, you could have still course-corrected things here by doing it differently. Instead, they really want to convince the audience that maybe this is just who she is. because I don't know, because she's related to the Mad King, because she's gone across the land slaughtering people before, but she did it for the right reasons previously. She slaughtered people for the right reasons. Here she had victory, no reason to slaughter people, and all those children and stuff she murdered. If she would have she would have just killed Cersei, publicly executed Cersei, the way Ned Stark was. That kind of would have felt like it came full circle. But also, if she, these children, that she liberated from this tyrant Cersei, because make no mistake, nobody's not going to be grateful for being liberated from Cersei Lannister. Nobody's going to not be grateful. These people would have been devoted to her. She would have had tons of soldiers. When these people grow up, they would have devoted themselves to her. I mean, so it makes no sense for her to just slaughter all these innocents instead of just Cersei. It makes no sense. Absolutely none at all. And there are better ways this could have been written, even after making her slaughter all those innocents. It would have been more, instead of trying to convince your audience, that this wasn't abrupt, this wasn't poorly written, that this wasn't fleshed out, trying to tell them, well, maybe she's just been this way the whole time, that she thinks she can do no wrong now that her ego's so built up with, it's just, a better way to do this final episode would have Daenerys herself recognize that she's crossed the line, that she's gone mad. She'll have her afraid of herself, begging Jon Snow to take the throne from her because it's too much power for her, or having and you could have had her announce to the Dothraki and Unsullied that, she's making Jon Snow the rightful king because he is. She's passing it off to him. That would have been more believable. That way you wouldn't have to explain why Grey Worm and all of them don't want to kill Jon Snow, and why the nobles are just going to let these people that slaughtered an entire city ride off into the sunset like they did nothing wrong, to go on and massacre other people in other lands and conquer other lands. If you would have had Daenerys actually recognize that she did something wrong, instead of having her like a small child, having her where it's like, oh, there's a learning curve to slaughtering innocents. I've been through these type of situations before where I didn't have to slaughter innocents to defeat the bad guys and take over a city, to liberate a city. I didn't have to do that before, but now there's a learning curve to this type of thing. That's how she talks about it. She's all smiles and sunshine about this. She's like, well, she doesn't say there's a learning curve to it, but that's pretty much the gist of it. What you get out of the conversation when Jon Snow realizes that she's too far gone and he's got to fucking knife her. But if you would have had her regret what she did, recognize what she did was wrong, that this may be too much power for her, and just announce to her armies that Jon Snow is rightful king, or even have her beg Jon Snow to put an end to her because she's crazy. Those probably would have been better ways to do it, honestly. But, in my personal opinion, this whole season's been wrong. After the first 2 episodes, the whole season's gone off course. And after I could have wrote a pretty damn good season. I could even make a video on it, because I don't want to be one of those guys that are just like criticizing something, saying it's poorly written, but doesn't express any other better way to write it. Doesn't have the creativity to say, hey, I could have wrote, somebody that comes out and says, this is garbage, it should have been better, but doesn't say how it could have been better or how they would have done it better, at the risk of taking criticism themselves that, hey, that isn't actually any better. So I probably will make a video on this, because when I look at these things, other than when I'm doing reviews on movies like X-Men, because I'm a fan of those, I will trash those movies from a fan perspective, not a moviegoer's perspective, not a critic's perspective. I'll have a bias in that situation. Seriously, I give an X-Men movie a 0 out of 10. Like, I give the first X-Men movie a 0 out of 10, even though most people love the first two X-Men movies. I hate them. I hate them, but it's because I have a bias. They are actually, from a perspective of a movie critic, those movies are actually decent movies, but from the perspective of a fan, I think they're garbage to, X-Men fans. But when it comes to a situation like Game of Thrones, I'm not familiar with the source material, the books and stuff, so I look at this from a writer's perspective, and I see absolutely everything wrong with it. Like, I don't have enough alcohol to justify this and, praise it. It's complete garbage. It's the worst episode this show has ever had. There just aren't enough words to express how insulting this is. I feel bad for the actors that they had to go through this, that they had to stomach their characters getting this conclusion. Yes, it's Game of Thrones. You don't expect a happy ending. Yes, Game of Thrones is always subverting your expectations and stuff. They're pretty shocking. This is why, I preferred Game of Thrones over The Walking Dead, because The Walking Dead, everything came so predictable to me. I literally predicted almost all the character deaths. All of them. And Game of Thrones, I couldn't predict anything, really. You could say, well, that's why you're so disappointed by this ending. But no, when it comes to a show like this, the proper way to do it, you always had the heroes losing and the villains eventually getting what comes to them. The heroes die brutal deaths after suffering torturous lives, and the villains kind of get the easy way out. They eventually get what's coming to them, but it's always a pretty quick death. But the proper way to do a show like this is nobody expected a happy ending. You could have gave people an actual good ending for once, because for years they've watched all these characters suffer again and again while the villains win. And the proper way to really subvert people's expectations in this situation would have the heroes triumph and actually have a proper closure to it. Instead, they went the M. Night Shyamalan route, where you try to do one thing, you rely completely on shock value twists until it doesn't pay off anymore. That's what they did here. You can't become too reliant on... You can't write in a formula like this, where you're reliant on shock value and twist. Not when it comes to paying off a proper ending. That's where M. Night Shyamalan failed, and that's where Game of Thrones failed. And I don't believe for a second that they actually care about these characters with the way they wrote this. There were all kinds of inconsistencies in character behaviors and things. It makes absolutely no sense. This whole last episode, you have... there would have been some good moments in here, but there's literally no good moments. The only good moment in here that I actually like is when the dragon, Drogon, burns the throne. Because, make no mistake about it, that throne is actually the main character of the show. Drogon kills the main character of this show. He melts that throne. I'm not sure the intelligence level of dragons in this show. I don't remember if they've elaborated on that. But if they haven't, then you really should have explained how he's going to recognize that throne was the problem the whole time. And he melted that thing down. You could say that, maybe he thought that she was killed by the throne because she was stabbed and that thing's pointy and he didn't see any knives or anything in the room and he thought the fucking chair did it. But God, that was the best moment to me. It finally killed that damn throne. That stupid thing that everybody's been fighting over for all this time. That's the only good moment in this entire thing. And they do kind of, they give Arya and Sansa a proper ending. Arya, she never wanted to be a lady. She wanted to be like a warrior, and she's gone off to explore. So they gave her a good ending. They gave Jon Snow the shaft. They gave Jon Snow the shaft. Absolutely. And Sansa, I don't know how I feel about that, because her becoming Queen of the North, you would think after all the shit she'd been through that she wouldn't even want to be a lady anymore, that she would want to be a warrior and just get revenge. So that's an okay ending, to have her become Lady of the North. But having Bran be king, having Tyrion be Hand of the King, and having people like Bronn joke around about brothels and whores, and have him be the master of coin, I don't know how I feel about that. Sam being the Maester, that's absolutely awesome. Brianna of Tarth being the Knight. That's a pretty awesome payoff to that character. But most of the stuff in here, it's just, even like you see parts of King's Landing intact, rebuilt. How long's it been? There's no like elaboration of time. Is this just after? Is this just after? Because she destroyed that. Literally, that whole city was ash. That whole city was ash, and there were some framework of buildings left. But they don't elaborate on time or anything like that. They're like, Jon Snow's been in prison maybe for weeks. I don't know. But the fact that he was in prison in the first place after he did what he did is pretty head scratching. It makes no sense. You could none of the characters actually make any sense in this episode. They're not true to the character. Even Tyrion Lannister saying Bronn has the greatest story. In comparison to Jon Snow, nobody on this show at all has a great story. In comparison to Jon Snow, none of them have a great story. Jon Snow had the perfect story. He had the perfect story. This nobody bastard that was sent off to this place of criminals and nobody, and treated like dirt, treated like he wasn't important at all. He didn't behave like he was entitled to the throne at all, even when he found out his heritage. After, doing all these things like, stopping the free folk from invading and making an alliance with them, and overcoming climbing the ranks and becoming commander of the Night's Watch, getting shanked by his own men for the betrayal because he wasn't the type of guy that would look the other way on shit like the Night Commander would. And to have him resurrected with the purpose of uniting all people, to not even defeat the Night King, to not do anything but slay Daenerys, and get sent back to the wall. Like, what he did was so wrong when he's rightfully entitled to the throne, and he essentially stopped somebody that was going to go on to conquer the world. That is pretty psychotic that they wrote this like this, and anybody that wants to say they were true to the characters or whatever, that you didn't like it just because Daenerys went evil or whatever. I don't even like Daenerys as much as other people. I don't like. I recognize those moments where she was willing to cross the line, and the only thing that stopped her was people telling her maybe she needs to rethink this. That, having her die like this, And when one of my favorite characters is Ser Jorah, and he died defending her just for her to go on and massacre her. He went through this big arc, right? She kicked him out for treason, for being a spy. And she treated him like he was the worst thing in the world. Like, and sent him off, cast him out, and he went on this journey where he contracted this supernatural disease or whatever, and came back and earned a place by her side, fighting through pits or whatever to become her champion. And he was kicked out for far less of what she went on to do. She went on to massacre all these people, and she judged him so harshly based on something as being a spy when he owned up to it, admitted it, and it's just all these things, all these people die for nothing in this show. Literally, they die for nothing in this show. So, I don't know. I might make a few more videos on this. I realize that everybody's probably already recognized all the flaws with this, and my video is pretty damn late on the subject, but when you're working 60 to 70 hours a week, and then you see something that's just so god-awful baffling, you've dedicated, years to this show, and people will argue, well, they gave you 7 great seasons before, so you should not be so harsh on them or whatever. But no, you shouldn't kiss somebody's ass just because, they do a good job for so long and then they start fucking up when it really matters. Like, what kind of justification is that? This show completely trashed all the characters, especially Jon Snow. The one character that probably deserved a happy ending above all others. Above all others. Just got sent back to the Night's Watch, which has no purpose anymore. The Night's Watch has no purpose anymore. He got sent back out there to wander off with the free folk like a nobody. And for the people that argue that Daenerys is crazy because she's related to the Mad King or whatever, well, Jon Snow's related to him too. I mean, look at his behavior compared to what Daenerys did. And, they killed off Jaime. Cersei went out with a whimper instead of a bang, completely out of character for Cersei. Jaime was on a redemptive arc that got thrown out the window very last minute when he decided he was going to go die with his sister and get buried under rubble. Like, all that character development meant nothing. Like, he just wanted to fuck Brianna, and then he had one of those regrettable moments where he wakes up to the person next to him and is like, oh God, what did I do? No, I love my sister. I need to go save my sister so I can be with her. None of this makes any sense at all. And goddamn, these writers really fucked up, dude. And it's complete. What makes it more devastating than anything else is because you don't expect it from these guys that have done such a good job up to this point. It's crazy. Anyways, I don't see how anybody can disagree with me on this subject. I really don't. I do not see any room for disagreement on this subject at all. You have to recognize that nothing is within character when it comes to these characters in this final episode. There is no consistency. Whether you believe Daenerys was a bad guy all along or not, the fact that Bran said he's previously said he didn't want to be king, and then he's like, oh, well, why do you think I came all this way in the final episode? You have to recognize that something isn't right there. And to have characters like Grey Worm who are willing to slaughter and execute prisoners, but let a foreign country of nobles that they conquered decide recognize as an authority and decide the fate of the people that killed their queen, you have to recognize that isn't true to their characters either. That there is no wiggle room here at all to say that this is a good episode. I mean, who's gonna defend this? Really? Who's gonna defend this shit? God damn. This is the most garbage ending of any show I have absolutely ever seen, and I love this show. Like, I have loved all 7 seasons of this show. I didn't even, it wasn't too big of a deal to me when Arya killed the Night King, because I thought, well, it's gonna pay off in other areas, in other ways. Jon Snow will get what he deserves. But god damn. So, like, subscribe, stay awesome. You know, like, comment down below. If you actually disagree with me in the comments section, please give a legitimate reason. I really want to know how anybody can say that this episode is actually good. I really want to see other perspectives of this. I really want to. Anybody who was able to enjoy this, I fucking envy you. I really do. I envy you that you were able to enjoy this, because now you can go back and you can watch all this stuff and really enjoy all of it all over again, because it plays out in a way that, you know, doesn't leave a bad taste in your mouth in the end. And I really love this show. I mean, I want to hear other perspectives. I want to see everything everybody has to say on this. It's crazy that this show ended up being such a disappointment to me. Like, subscribe, stay awesome, rock on.